At 6:52 on a January morning, my daughter-in-law set her wet boots on the kitchen table, 6 inches from my coffee, and told me to have them dry and polished before she left for her book club. I looked at her, and I looked at my son standing in the doorway behind her, arms crossed, waiting to see what I'd do. "Either you do what Vanessa asked," he said, "or you can find somewhere else to be by tonight." I smiled, folded my newspaper, and walked upstairs to get the suitcase I had packed 4 days earlier. By the time I reached the bottom of the porch steps with that suitcase in my hand, my son had already stopped watching. He'd gone back to his coffee like nothing at all had happened. 9 days later, my phone showed 41 missed calls, and every single one of them was from him. Before I go further, I want to say thank you for being here with me. If you're watching this while you make your own coffee this morning, or on your lunch break, or in bed with the lights off, I'd love to know, where are you joining me from tonight? Drop it in the comments. This story, like the others I tell, is built from fictional people and fictional places, though I promise you the feelings inside it are real enough that some of you will recognize them. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before you understand who I became. My name is Walter Higgins, and the morning this all started, I was 68 years old, standing at a stove that wasn't mine, in a kitchen that used to feel like it belonged to me and had slowly, over 2 years, stopped. The house sat on Larkspur Lane in a town outside Columbus, Ohio, a 2-story colonial with green shutters and a porch swing I'd built myself the summer my son turned 12. I'd sold my own house 18 months earlier, the one my late wife Ruth and I had lived in for 31 years, because my son Gregory had asked me to. Practically begged me, if I'm honest. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone in that big house. Come live with us. Help with the kids. We'll all be better for it." And I believed him, because I wanted to believe him, because grief makes a man want somewhere to put himself down. Ruth had passed 11 months before that conversation. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. The kind that takes a woman who canned her own tomatoes and led the church choir and turns her into someone who can't remember your name in 6 weeks. I sat with her every night of those 6 weeks. I held a wet cloth to her lips because she couldn't swallow water anymore. I promised her, the night before she went, that I wouldn't let myself disappear into that house alone. So when Gregory called with his offer, I heard Ruth's voice telling me to say yes. I sold the house on Cedar Street for $210,000. I gave Gregory $60,000 of it to help with the renovation, a mother-in-law suite he said he'd build onto the back of his house for me. That suite never got built. The money went, as far as I could tell, into a kitchen remodel with quartz countertops and a wine refrigerator built into the island. I moved instead into what had been Gregory's home office, a room barely big enough for a twin bed, a dresser, and the recliner Ruth used to sit in every evening while she did her crossword. I brought that recliner with me. It was the only piece of our old life that made the trip. For the first few months, it wasn't unbearable. I helped where I could. I picked up my grandchildren, Ella and Miles, from school 3 days a week, while Gregory worked, and Vanessa did, whatever it was, Vanessa did, yoga classes, lunches with women whose names I never learned, appointments she never explained. I cooked dinner most nights because nobody else seemed inclined to. I fixed the garbage disposal, resealed the driveway, replaced the fence post that had rotted through. I told myself I was earning my keep, the way a man of my generation was raised to believe he must. Vanessa was 29 when I moved in, 17 years younger than Gregory, and from the very first week, there was something in the way she looked at me that told me exactly where I stood in her accounting of the household. Not a father, not even really a person. A fixture. Something the house came with, like the water heater in the basement, useful, occasionally in need of maintenance, not worth a conversation. She never said, "Good morning" to me. Not once. In 2 years. She'd come down the stairs already dressed, already on her phone, and move through the kitchen as though I were part of the countertop. If I made coffee, she'd pour a cup without a word of thanks and complain, later, that I'd made it too strong. If I cooked, she'd eat 2 bites and leave the rest, saying she was trying to be better about carbs. Small things. The kind of things you can't point to and call cruelty. Not to another adult. Not without sounding like an old man keeping score. But I was keeping score. Every man does, whether he admits it or not. The thing about my son that broke my heart slower than anything else was watching him become quiet around her. Gregory had been a mouthy kid, argumentative, the kind of boy who'd debate you on principle just to see where the conversation went. Ruth used to laugh about it. That one's going to be a lawyer or a preacher, mark my words. He became neither. He became an insurance adjuster who came home every night and went silent the moment Vanessa's mood shifted, the way water goes still before a storm changes direction. I watched my son fold himself smaller and smaller in his own house to keep the peace with a woman he'd known for 4 years. And somewhere in that folding, he stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as one more variable in the equation he had to solve to keep Vanessa calm. The morning it broke open started ordinary enough. I was up at 6, same as always, my hip aching the way it always does, in January cold, 68 years, pressing down harder some mornings than others. I made coffee. I stood at the window over the sink and watched the sun come up gray and thin over the frozen yard, and I thought, the way I often did in that hour, about Ruth, about how she used to hum while she cooked, some hymn from choir practice, off-key and unashamed of it. The kitchen had been quiet since she died. Every kitchen I'd stood in since had been quiet in that same particular way. Vanessa came down at 6:50 in her workout clothes, her hair already pulled back for whatever class she had that morning. She had a pair of tall boots in her hand, the leather dark and soaked through, mud caked thick along the soles from wherever she'd worn them, the evening before she and her sister had gone to some outdoor holiday market. I remembered Gregory mentioning it. She set the boots down on the kitchen table, 6 inches from my coffee cup. Not the counter, not the mat by the door where boots are supposed to go, the table where I ate my meals, where Ella did her homework, where this family, such as it was, still occasionally sat together. These need to be dry and polished by 4, she said, not looking up from her phone. I've got book club, and I want to wear them. I looked at the boots. I looked at her, I said, quietly. Vanessa, I'm not going to do that. That got her attention. She looked up like I'd spoken a foreign language. Excuse me? I said, I'm not going to polish your boots, I said. I'll gladly move them off the table so nobody sits down in mud. But I'm not your shoe shine, and I never agreed to be. I want you to understand, whoever's listening to this tonight, that I did not raise my voice. I did not slam a cabinet or throw the boots across the room, though God knows some part of me wanted to. I said it the way you'd tell someone the mail hadn't come yet. Flat. Final. True. Vanessa's face did something I'd never seen it do before, a kind of astonished offense, like she'd asked the sky a simple question and the sky had talked back. And that's when Gregory walked in. He must have heard the last of it from the hallway, because he came in already tight-jawed, already positioned, the way a man positions himself when he's decided in advance whose side he's going to take before he's even heard the argument. Dad, he said, what's going on? Vanessa didn't wait for me to answer. Your father just told me he won't clean my boots. After everything, and she let that trail off the way people do when they want you to fill in blanks that don't actually exist. After everything. After what, exactly? After I'd raised $3,000 less in rent from him than any apartment in that town would have cost? After I'd driven her children to soccer practice in a snowstorm the week before because she'd had a headache? Gregory looked at me. And here's the part I need you to sit with, because it's the part that changed everything that came after. He didn't ask me what happened. He didn't ask if I was all right, or ask Vanessa to explain herself, or do what a son is supposed to do in that half second when he still has the choice stand between his father and the person hurting him. He just said, in a voice gone low and strange, like something in him had already decided this months ago and was only now finding the excuse to say it out loud. Either you apologize to Vanessa and take care of what she asked, or you find somewhere else to stay. Tonight. The kitchen went very quiet. I want to tell you, my heart pounded, that my hands shook, that I felt the floor tilt under me. None of that happened. What I felt instead was something I can only describe as arriving like a door I'd known, was somewhere in the house, finally swinging open in front of me. Because here is what my son did not know. What neither of them knew. I was not the fragile old widower they believed they'd taken in out of charity. I had spent 39 years building a fleet maintenance company from a single tow truck and a rented garage bay into Higgins diesel and fleet services. 11 locations across 3 states, a company I'd sold 4 years before Ruth got sick for an amount that still sits, largely untouched, in an account neither Gregory nor Vanessa had ever asked me a single question about, not once. In 2 years of living under their roof, my own son never once asked me what happened to the money from selling my company. He assumed, because I lived simply, because I drove a 12-year-old truck and wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation, that there was nothing left. He assumed poverty because I never advertised otherwise, and because in our family, my late father taught me a man's business is his own, and I never saw fit to correct that lesson. I had also, 4 days before that January morning, packed a suitcase. Not out of premonition exactly, out of pattern recognition, which is a different thing, and maybe a sadder one. I'd watched the temperature in that house drop for 2 years the way you watch weather roll in from the west, slow but unmistakable. If you've lived long enough to know what a storm looks like before it arrives, I'd packed that suitcase the same week I'd quietly called a man named Otis Reyes, who used to run point on logistics for my company and who I trusted more than almost anyone alive. I'd asked Otis one question. If I needed to leave a house on short notice, no drama, no scene, would he come get me? He hadn't asked why. He'd just said, "Say the word, Walt." So when my son told me to apologize or leave, I said, "All right, Gregory." I said it the way you'd agree to a weather forecast. I turned, and I walked upstairs, past the wall where Gregory and Vanessa's wedding photos hung, past school pictures of Ella and Miles, past not one single photograph of me in that entire hallway, because in 2 years, no one had thought to take one. I went into the room that had been Gregory's office and was now mine in name only, and I opened the closet, and I took down the suitcase from the top shelf. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, Ruth's wedding ring, which I still carried in my coat pocket most days, transferred that morning into the suitcase's inner pocket where I kept my documents. A photograph of Ruth at the county fair in 1979, laughing at something outside the frame that I've never been able to remember and have spent years trying to imagine. A folder bank records, the sale documents from Higgins Diesel, a copy of my will, updated 8 months earlier by a lawyer named Priscilla Odom, though nobody in that house knew her name or what she'd helped me quietly arrange. I carried the suitcase back down the stairs. Vanessa was in the living room, and she had her phone up, filming me, I realized. The old man being thrown out, evidence for whatever story she intended to tell, her book club or her sister or whoever needed convincing that she'd been the reasonable one. Gregory stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching me the way you watch a man you expect to break down and beg. I did not break down. I did not beg. I set the suitcase down for just a moment, put on my coat, and buttoned it slowly, the way I used to before church with Ruth, taking my time because there was no reason left to hurry. Then I picked the suitcase back up and looked at my son. "You asked me to leave," I said. "I'm leaving." Something crossed his face in that half-second, not quite regret, too small and too fast to be that yet, but something. The ghost of a thing that might, given years, grow into regret. I didn't wait to see if it would. I opened the front door. The January air hit me like a hand against the chest, and it felt, God help me, like relief. Otis was already at the curb. He'd been there 11 minutes, he told me later, parked and waiting, because I'd called him from the top of the stairs the moment I closed that closet door. He got out of his truck when he saw me on the porch, took the suitcase from my hand without a word, the way he used to load freight 30 years ago, quick and certain, and asking no questions. He didn't need answered. He opened the passenger door. "Where to, Walt?" "The Sycamore," I said. "Just for tonight. I'll figure the rest out from there." He nodded, the kind of nod that carries a whole conversation in it, and drove me into town without either of us saying much of anything else. The heater in his old truck worked better than it had any right to. I watched the frozen fields go by and thought, not about Gregory, not yet, but about Ruth, and what she would have said watching me walk out that door with my chin up instead of down. I think she'd have been proud. I think she'd also have told me it took me too long. The Sycamore Hotel is the nicest place in that town, an old restored railway hotel with a lobby full of brass fixtures and a fireplace that's been burning, they claim, since 1946. I checked in under my own name, no hesitation, because for the first time in 2 years, I had absolutely nothing to hide from anyone. I paid for a week up front. I went up to my room, sat down on the edge of a bed that was mine, and only mine for the first time in a very long time, and I called Priscilla Odom. "It's done," I told her. "I left this morning. How do you feel?" she asked, and I remember the question surprised me, because nobody had asked me that in longer than I could easily account for. "Lighter," I said, and it was true. Over the following days, I did not call Gregory. I did not check in, did not send a message letting him know where I'd landed, did not do any of the things a guilty conscience drives a person to do. I slept. I ate breakfast at a diner 2 blocks from the hotel where the waitress, a woman named Dolores with silver in her hair and kindness in her voice, called me honey and refilled my coffee without being asked. I walked the length of Main Street twice a day, my hip aching but my chest, for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, not aching at all. On the third day, I met with Priscilla in her office to finalize something I'd been circling for months, but had never quite let myself commit to: the trust. Higgins Diesel had sold for $11 million 4 years earlier. After taxes, after the modest life I'd built for myself and Ruth, after the $60,000 I'd already quietly handed to Gregory for a renovation that never happened, there remained just under $9 million sitting in accounts my son had never once asked about. I had always planned, in some vague, unexamined way, that it would go to him and to my grandchildren eventually. That morning in Priscilla's office, I made it specific instead of vague. $700,000 into a trust for Ella and Miles, locked until each of them turned 25, untouchable by their parents in the meantime. A separate provision: should Gregory and Vanessa still be married at that point, and should Gregory wish it, for a modest annual distribution enough to help, not enough to rescue a man from ever having to stand up for himself again. And the remainder, the bulk of it earmarked for the Ruth Higgins Memorial Fund, a scholarship I'd been quietly building for 2 years through the community college where Ruth had taught night classes in accounting for a decade before she retired. 12 scholarships a year, full ride, for adult students coming back to finish a degree later in life the way so many of Ruth's students had. I signed the documents on the fourth day. I felt, doing it, less like a man exacting revenge and more like a man finally being honest about what he actually wanted his life to have meant. On the fifth day, the calls started. I hadn't given Gregory the hotel's number, and he didn't have it, but somehow I found out later it was Ella, 13 years old, and quietly furious at her parents in a way I hadn't fully appreciated. Somehow he learned where I'd gone. The first call came at 7:14 in the morning. I let it ring through to voicemail. Then another, 20 minutes later. By that evening there were 11 missed calls and 4 voicemails, each one a little more frantic than the last, none of them, notably, containing the word sorry. The first voicemail was mostly logistics. Where are you? Are you okay? Come back. We can talk about this. The second had an edge of anger in it, like some part of him believed I was the one being unreasonable, disappearing like this, making a scene of my own kind. It wasn't until the fourth voicemail, left close to midnight, that his voice cracked in a way I recognized from when he was 7 years old and had broken Ruth's favorite serving dish and didn't know how to tell her. "Dad," he said. "Vanessa told me. She told me what happened with the company. With the money. Is that true? Dad, please just call me back." So, Vanessa had done some research of her own in the days I'd been gone. Not out of guilt, I'd learn later, but out of a much more practical instinct. She'd grown curious, in my absence, about exactly what her father-in-law's assets actually were, and a conversation with her own father, who worked in commercial real estate and recognized the name Higgins Diesel and Fleet Services from an industry publication, had connected a set of dots. Nobody in that house had ever bothered connecting themselves. By the 9th day, the missed calls numbered 41. I know, because I finally sat down that evening with Otis at the diner, both of us with coffee going cold in front of us, and counted them together like a man doing an inventory of a storm's damage. "You gonna call him back?" Otis asked. "Eventually," I said. "Not because he's sorry about the money, because I want to know if he's sorry about anything else." I called Gregory on the 10th day, from a bench in the small park across from the hotel, the January sun, weak but present overhead. He picked up before the first ring finished. "Dad, I'm all right," I said, before he could ask. "I want you to know that first. I'm safe. I'm not sick. I'm not in trouble. I'm all right." There was a long silence, and then I heard something in his breathing that told me he was crying, quietly, the way men of his generation still mostly do, trying not to let the sound of it travel. "I've been calling for 9 days," he said. "I know. Why didn't you answer?" "Because for the first 9 days," I said, "I don't think you were calling to apologize. I think you were calling because you found out I had money, and you were scared of what that meant for you. And I needed you to sit with that feeling for a while before we talked, because I sat with a version of that feeling for 2 years, Gregory, every single day." He didn't argue with me. That, more than anything, told me something had actually shifted in him. "You're right," he said. "I was scared. I still am. But Dad, I've had 9 days to think, and it's not really about the money. I keep thinking about you standing in that kitchen with Vanessa's boots in front of you, and me not even asking what happened before I told you to get out. I keep thinking about how long you must have felt like that in our house before that morning, and I don't have an excuse for it. I just have a lot of shame." I sat on that bench for a long moment, watching a squirrel work at something frozen into the grass, letting my son's voice sit in the quiet, the way you let bread sit before you cut it. "I'd like to see you," I finally said. "Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. And Gregory, I'd like to see you without Vanessa there, at least the first time. This conversation is between you and me." We met 3 days later at the diner where Dolores had been pouring my coffee for 2 weeks by then. Gregory looked older than I remembered, though it had only been 2 weeks, the particular tiredness of a man who hasn't slept well and knows he's earned the sleeplessness. He sat down across from me, and before I'd said a word, he apologized. Not the way people apologize when they want something, quick and packaged and aimed at getting past the moment. He apologized the slow way, the true way, going back further than the boots, further than the money, back to the 18 months I'd lived in his house, feeling like furniture, back to the $60,000 that never became a mother-in-law suite, back, even, to some of what he remembered from his childhood, moments he said he'd never let himself examine until he had 9 days alone with nothing to do but examine them. I did not tell him about the trust that day. I did not tell him about the scholarship fund, or the exact number sitting in those accounts, or any of the architecture I'd built in Priscilla's office while he was leaving me voicemails. That would come later, when I was ready, on my own terms, not as a bargaining chip in a moment of his contrition, but as a separate truth entirely, offered when it could be received as generosity rather than leverage. What I did tell him was this, that I would not be moving back into that house. Not because I couldn't forgive him, I could, and eventually did, but because at 68 years old, I had finally understood something it took me far too long to learn. That the number of years left to me was not infinite, and that I did not intend to spend whatever remained of them making myself small enough to keep someone else comfortable. I told him I'd found a small apartment, 2 towns over, close enough that I could see Ella and Miles every week, far enough that I would never again wake up in a room that wasn't fully mine. He cried again at that. Not because I was punishing him, he told me later, but because he understood, for the first time, that his father had a whole interior life, desires, boundaries, a story that didn't revolve entirely around being useful to his son's household, and he was ashamed it had taken, losing me from under his roof, to notice. 3 months after that morning in the kitchen, I sat Gregory and Ella and Miles down at my new kitchen table, small, round, seating exactly 4, the first table I'd owned outright in 2 years, and I told them about the trust, about Higgins diesel, about the 11 locations, about the scholarship fund carrying Ruth's name into classrooms she'd never see but had shaped all the same. Ella cried. Miles, 11 and mostly bewildered by the emotional weather of adults, asked if this meant he could get a dog. Gregory just sat there for a long moment with his hand over his mouth, and then he said the thing I'd been waiting 2 years, if I'm honest, to hear him say without me having had to ask for it. "You didn't owe us any of this, Dad. Not after how we treated you." "No," I agreed. "I didn't. I'm doing it because it's who I want to be, not because it's who you needed me to be. Vanessa and I have not fully mended things. Not the way Gregory and I have." She apologized, eventually, in a letter that read more like a legal document than a confession, careful, and measured in a way that told me exactly how much of it was strategy and how much was genuine remorse, probably somewhere close to even. I've made my peace with that. Not every relationship gets fully repaired, and I've decided, this late in my life, that I no longer need every relationship to be repaired in order for me to be at peace. Some doors you close gently and let stay closed, and that's not bitterness. That's just wisdom, arriving later than you'd have liked, but arriving all the same. I think about that January morning often, the boots on the table, the ultimatum, the suitcase I'd packed 4 days before I needed it. I don't think of it as the day my family fell apart. I think of it as the day I stopped participating in my own disappearance. For 2 years, I had made myself smaller and quieter and more agreeable in that house because I believed that was what love required of me, that being needed and being respected were the same thing, and that if I just kept giving, eventually someone would notice and give something back. I was wrong about that. Being needed and being respected are not the same thing at all. A house can need you, desperately need, your cooking, your handiwork, your quiet presence filling in the gaps of a family too busy to notice its own gaps and still not respect you in the slightest. I let that go on far longer than I should have, and if there's one thing I hope you take from tonight, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from, it's this. Don't wait until someone hands you an ultimatum before you remember you're allowed to have boundaries of your own. Don't wait until you're standing in a kitchen with someone's dirty boots in front of you before you decide you deserve better than that. The cost of staying silent doesn't stay the same size forever. It grows, quietly, in the space you keep making for it, until one morning you look up and realize you've disappeared almost entirely inside your own kindness. I am not a hero in this story. I want to be honest about that before I let you go tonight. I was a father who loved his son by disappearing into usefulness instead of teaching him what respect actually costs. I paid for things instead of setting boundaries. I stayed quiet through 2 years of small humiliations because I told myself that was what patience looked like, when really, some of it was just fear. Fear of being alone again, the way I'd been alone in the 6 weeks. I sat beside Ruth's hospital bed, fear that if I asked for better treatment, I'd lose the only family I had left. I don't believe anymore that dignity and family are opposites you have to choose between. I believe now that real love, the kind Ruth showed me for 31 years, never once asked me to make myself smaller in order to receive it. If someone in your life is asking that of you, asking you to shrink, to serve, to disappear a little more each day in exchange for a roof or a title or the appearance of peace, I hope you find, sooner than I did, the strength to pack your own suitcase and mean it. This has been a story about a father and a son, about the slow architecture of quiet disrespect and the even slower architecture of finding your way back from it. It's about choosing dignity over destruction, patience over anger, and love that's strong enough to walk out a door without slamming it. If something in this story found you tonight, if some part of it felt closer to your own life than you expected, I hope you'll tell me about it in the comments. Tell me which moment hit hardest. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's not too late to stop disappearing, send this their way. Thank you, truly, for staying with me until the very last word. It means more than you know. I'll be here again soon with another story whenever you're ready to listen.